One of the biggest performance unlock that you can give yourself and your AI agents as a backend developer is designing your APIs correctly. And I've been developer for many years and I've seen a lot of API patterns. People using different sort of things, different frameworks, different runtimes, different practices. And combining all that experience, what I'm about to tell you is the best way I have found for organizing APIs at scale. Doesn't matter if you're doing just 5 APIs or if you're doing 5,000. What I'm about to show you is the best way for organizing APIs. This is something that my own startup uses today to serve thousands of requests per second. And this works really well for all use cases, for debugging, for adding new API endpoints, for AI agents to create API endpoints without actually getting drowned inside context. Let me talk about this. So you see, typically what happens is depending on the language and the runtime that you're using, you will go with some weird technologies like GraphQL, TRPC, Express.js, whatever. And the reason you will go with these technologies is because your AI agent and other YouTubers and influencers will push a lot on these frameworks because they are just popular. They have a lot of stars on GitHub. But hear me out when I tell you this. If you're defining a foundation for your startup, for your infrastructure, you absolutely don't need any of these tools if you do the things correctly. Let me give you a brief overview of how the things would work, and then I'll just introduce you to our own code base that we use in our company to serve thousands of requests per second. See, the core idea for an API starts with the client itself, right? So you have a client over here that's making a request to your backend over here, right? I discussed this in more detail. How do you design your backend properly in one request versus a million requests per second video, and a bunch of previous videos as well. So I'll just give you a crash course here. When this request arrives at your backend, the primary responsibility of your backend is to do the few things. First is, of course, rate limit the request. Then it is validate the input, which is coming in, untrusted input. Then run the handler and then return the request back to the client, right? So your backend should send this back to the client itself. That's all you have to do effectively. And that is effectively also all that your single API endpoints should provide. How much rate limit is there? How do you want to validate the input? What sort of code should be run? And of course, you can make this whole thing type safe, whether you're using TypeScript, Golang, Rust, Java, any of the technology. So what I'm telling you about over here is a sort of like an agnostic, a language, a framework agnostic approach. Now you can go ahead and pick these principles and apply them directly without even using a framework. You can use different things at different points. For example, for validation, in our case, because our system is built on TypeScript and Node.js, unfortunately, I'll get to that part in a different video where I have found a recent new love for Elixir as a programming language and Beam as a virtual machine. I'll cover that in a different video. But if you're stuck with Node.js or TypeScript, then Zod is a great library for you to use, right? For validating input. And similarly, with rate limits, you can have different approaches, DB style or a Redis style, whatever. For DB, you might want unlocked table if you're going for Postgres. Redis is simple. And then running handler is eventually like actual code, right? Let's take a look at how do we do it at our startup. Now, before I show you actual code, let me show you how we organize, test the APIs. The interface that you're seeing right now is a product from a company called Requestly. Requestly is the sponsor of this video and a great free API client for you to manage and organize your APIs. You can go to their website from the link in the description. There are a bunch of features that you can use inside Requestly. The simplest one is just managing APIs, which I'm showing you right now. So all these APIs, these bunch of APIs that you see are actual real APIs from our startup that we can use, test, and debug right inside Requestly. So you see, in case of Fermion, we follow a concept of namespaces. So extending a little bit on top of this, what we have is that the first step in case of backend is even before rate limit, it has to figure out where is the API, right? And this step is critical because it has to figure out which API is it calling. So our client is in fact configured to send that information in the body itself, which is namespace of the API, which in this case, the one I'm showing you inside Requestly is public right now. You can add all sorts of namespaces in here. And then the API name, which is the name of the handler itself. Let's say if we are talking about this get user ID. So it's client's responsibility to send these two pieces of information. Now you can technically argue that why do you need namespace? And yes, you are right. You can keep it just on API names as well. But it's just nice to have namespaces because it allows you to just categorize kind of APIs a bit. There is no functional difference between any of them. So it's not like public APIs are any more secure or different from other namespaces. But if needed, you can customize them on top of your namespace handler as well, because your core part of how the request is processed is handled by view, right? That is the main difference between using something like TRPC or Express or anything versus just building it on your own, is that you are fully in control. Plus, as you can evidently see from Requestly itself, that we also don't exactly follow REST standard, right? You can see like even for get endpoints, we have the post requests going on, and for create endpoints also we have post requests going on. This is also an unpopular but a deliberate decision that we have taken. You can technically have put, patch, get, all of them, and then you can have like bunch of status codes as well, and that will look a little bit nice, a little bit colorful, but that comes back to this output. Right? This output that your API is returning has to be again consumed by your own client, right? So this output over here, if you have REST API standards, so you have, the output as get, post, it's not technically output, it's like an input because the client has to specify that, but still your API has to consider what the endpoint is coming out to be, right? And then there are differences between these endpoints as well. For example, get cannot have body, right? And reverse proxies will treat it differently. It might also cache it in between if you have like some different setup that you don't control. So instead of doing all of this, we just standardize it that you have to contact the backend always using post requests. First of all this, and second of all, we have version logged, or we have not version logged, we have just logged the status code to be 200, which again, if I send just a random request over here, you can see it's failing the validation over here, but you will see that we do get 200 okay over here, right? And this is because there are so many use cases and so many APIs that can have different sort of errors with them, is that you can't treat status code 200 or status code as a general value for just specifying error with the API input and output, right? In our case, the way we work and the way we have designed the API is that if 200 is the status code, this effectively means that backend actually processed your request, right? So we do use this in such a way that if you are getting a 200 status code, that means the request reached the backend, we were able to parse it, process it, the backend is up, it is functional, and you got a response in return, which could be like actual error, or it could be like, okay, whatever you requested for, right? For example, you can see inside here Requestly, inside Requestly itself, I can quickly debug that the preview that I'm getting is with 200 okay, and the headers that I'm getting back also don't indicate anything else over here, right? So again, like for example, if Cloudflare itself, which is through what we proxy our request, if Cloudflare itself is down, then we will not return 200 okay, then it will be like a 500 or something. But anything else, as long as it's reaching our own infrastructure, which is running on our own servers, right? As long as that is happening, you would always get a JSON of a specific schema, which would be output, and then you will have a status in that field, which will be either okay or error. And it'll if it's error, then it will have like an error message associated with it, which will always be string, right? So these are some constraints that we have put across. I'll show you that in the code, but this is true for every single API that we have. Now, if I actually add an request user ID over here, but even leave out the Fermion auth token, the Fermion API key actually, and if I send this request, let's just make this 100 as well and send this request, you will see that now this time we get an invalid API key, right? So see what's happening over here in our case is if I don't have the right input, first of all, then the validation is the one that is taking place first. So what you're seeing over here is that we are checking rate limit indeed in this order itself. We have rate limit first, or we have where first, then rate limit, then we validate, and then we run the handler. And this handler has a collection of a bunch of functions, which is like a single line function, which blocks auth access depending on, whatever header values or whatever you're passing. That is why you can see like over here, I can pass the wrong input and I still get like a legit data corruption as a response instead of getting an invalid API key. And the reason for that is because it's cheaper to validate the input than actually running the auth or handler first and extracting out the authentication from it, right? Because that would involve a database call. So it can also be structured very carefully, right? The way you want. Not only this, with Requestly, you can also do a bunch of more things. You can simulate different methods. For example, we have logged this to post, but if I want to see like what will happen if I send it a put request, and if I hit send, you will see that our backend itself returns unsupported method. You see that it still returns 200 okay, because like I mentioned, as long as it's reaching us, we will return you the right code. But you see over here, we just give you unsupported on this because we just don't support the specific method that you are sending. Similarly, you can play around these values and quickly debug what's going on with an API as long as this is synchronized with your code base, which is again possible because Requestly's API client is Git friendly. This whole workspace that you are seeing over here, which Requestly has created, where you can add multiple files, API endpoints, make changes. These are simple JSON files on your file system, which can be synchronized with Git easily. So this interface itself can sit inside your backend repository, and you you'll be able to sync it with other people who are making changes easily. Requestly can also be used as an HTTP interceptor, which allows you to intercept and modify network requests. So in case if you're developing local and you want to use the production backend, but you really don't want to make any changes on production to simulate a response, or you just don't want to start a local server because of environment variables or the configuration not right in place, you can still use Requestly, use your production DB, but only intercept and modify the response for specific APIs or specific things that you need. Now, if you look at the source code that we have over here, you see that backend for Fermion is a monorepo, and one of the packages is our API package. And inside API, we have functions and this public folder, which is the same namespace that I just showed you inside Requestly. So you see over here, every function that I showed you get user ID, again in Requestly, which we were making the query for. Every function has two files. First is constants, which defines the metadata about that function itself, like what is the rate limit, what is the expected input, output. If it's like a public function, what should be open API spec for that, right? And the second file is the handler itself, which we call as run.ts. So this handler is the actual code that executes when we are done with validation, rate limiting, where all of this, and then when we are about to run the handler, right? And this is also the place where you want to block the auth access. It's possible that for some functions, even in a specific namespace, you might not want to block an access. For others, it's possible that you want to block access. That's why we let it define on a function level which function needs access, which ones does not. In our case, these functions can also have a third optional file, which is test.spec.ts, which runs on the CI and which can test the handler directly. This could be anything, functionality test, you're just making sure that the unit test is proper, or you're just writing these tests directly inside Requestly as well, which is also possible. So these tests which are inside Requestly on pre-request and post-request can be included so that you get a nice view inside the software itself. In our case, we have a separate test.spec.ts file, which can also run locally or on CI. So let's go inside one of these functions, right? This constants.ts inside get user ID is the simplest one that I can figure out. And you see that there are a bunch of imports over here, which are just types. We have first block as a metadata. Now this metadata exists because this is a public function, right? And we want to create an open API spec out of it automatically for other people to use. For example, if you're creating a collection with Requestly, that can be automated if you are adding some sort of metadata inside your code itself, create an open API spec and import it directly inside Requestly. That will work fine. Then we have input schema, which has to be defined like this as a specific export with the specific name. Because remember that every function will follow a same schema, right? The request will arrive, backend will look at where the function is inside the namespace and the API name, and it will start to get specific things, right? It will start to ask that function, where is your input schema? So it needs to be specific. So in this case, like I mentioned, we use Zod. So we are specifying that this is how it should look like. It should have a user email or a username, or at least like one of them, right? You can even go a little tighter with this, where you can create like, this is usually what we also do for our internal APIs, but to keep our external APIs a little more simpler and easier to read, we do this. But our actual way for this would be something like this. So you'll have type email and then email as z.string.email, or you want the type to be username, and in that case you want the username to be z.string. Whatever, you can do a min max or whatever. I think we do have a username schema as well. Yeah, we do have a username schema over here, so we can use that as well in our case internally, right? But this is not what we are doing right now, so you can also keep it like sort of simple. Now an important point here is that this can also go ahead and use the min max constraints that you have, right? So all sorts of validation can happen inside this metadata file itself. This is actually a code that is also getting executed on every request, right? So you have to be slightly careful. This is not just metadata, this is also validating your code on the runtime. Then the output schema is also there in our case. So we strictly define the output schema as well for two reasons. First of all, this will obviously help you write more type safe code over here. And this is not an option in languages like Rust or Golang at all, right? Even in TypeScript only or in JavaScript, you have the option to just return anything, right? In Golang or Rust, I'm sure like you would create a schema for the return type of your API. But the core idea is that you again define the output schema very simply inside the same file, and all of this is templated code, right? So effectively for every file that you are writing, all you have to write is this part, right? Everything else is template. Then you define a rate limit, maximum request per window. So you define like how much is allowed, like 1 minute, 60 seconds, 1 minute. In 1 minute window, you only have the ability to request this API endpoint for 60 times, right? And all of this logic is again abstracted away over here, right? In our case, even the rate limit logic is custom. So rate limit applies first on IP address, then it can apply if your auth authenticated, right? So if you're unauthorized, then the rate limit is global on the IP itself. But if you are authorized, then it's on your user account, right? And then all of this is also sort of like metadata. I mean, technically we can remove this, but this is just inside our generator function. And run.ts is the actual meat of the code, right? So once every check has passed, rate limit has passed, validation has passed, this is what gets run. And for example, in this case, you can see it's a very small function. There is nothing else over here. This is the auth check that I was talking about. So this is the auth check that blocks or throws automatically. So this is the check that is actually giving us this error. If we go inside this body, and let's say if I give this actual legit values and run this, you will see this error invalid API key is actually coming inside from this check, because this function finally then executes, because now we have the rate limit fine and we have the input and output fine as well. So yeah, once you have an API structure and an infrastructure like this basically scales to the moon, because all you have to do now, all you have to worry about is the next time you want to create a new API is you have to go inside that namespace, which in our case could be public, let's say, and then you have to go inside this and have to create get user data, let's say 1, 2, 3, whatever. And then all your agent has to do is create two files, constants.ts and run.ts. In our case, this could be different for you. This keeps it very simple for your AI agent to also understand what's going on, right? It does not have to load a lot of things inside its own context. It can just see that I have to write these two files, and whatever I do in these two files will impact the whole way this API endpoint works and operates. This is completely language agnostic, so don't get me wrong over here that it's just for TypeScript. You can do this in Golang, you can do this in Rust, you can do this in C, C++, any of that. All you need to do is build this one layer first, which intercepts the request. It breaks down the body, it parses whether it's coming in the specific payload style or not, and it sends this to the actual function that is required to do all of this breakdown, right? Now the code for this would be very specific based on your application and needs. That's why I'm not going into this part, which actually gets the request in the first place. But if you want to check this, you can see that basically what we do as the very first thing is we take the body and we parse it with Zod again in this following schema. So we expect every API request to be in this following schema, where this data comes from the API endpoint itself, right? That's why there's a pass through here, because we don't know what this data is defined by the API ahead of time, but we know the rest of the things, the function name, the namespace, and maybe the auth token, which the client is passing down, right, to authorize themselves. So yeah, that's pretty much it for this video. And do check out Requestly, which makes it easier for us to manage our APIs, test them, and share them with our developer team internally. The link is in the description, so do check them out. That's all for this one, and I'll see you in the next video very soon.